Hello, my name is Matthias Wivel. I'm the curator of 16th century Italian paintings at the National Gallery in London. Welcome to this series of 5 live transmissions on Titian's so-called Poesie, of which we'll be talking about 2 today. The Diana and Acteon over here, and the Diana and Calisto over here. These are part of a series of 6 mythological paintings that Titian painted for Philip II, King of Spain, in the 1550s and early 1560s. They are amongst the most significant paintings in the history of art in Europe. They influenced generations of painters and appreciators of art, and were dispersed fairly in subsequent centuries from the Spanish Royal Collection, and went to various distinguished collections across Europe and ultimately America. And this series of transmissions is in preparation for their reunification very soon, starting at the National Gallery, then going in London, then going to the Scottish National Gallery where we are today, and then to the Prado in Madrid, coming back to the Spanish Royal Collection, and ultimately to the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. This will be the first time they're seen together since the later 16th century. So it's a really remarkable event, and one we're very proud of in presenting to you. I'm here with my colleague, Aidan Weston Lewis, Chief Curator at the Scottish National Gallery, and I will turn over to him now.
Thank you. Yes, well, we're very fortunate in having had these 2 great pictures on display in the gallery for most of the time since the end of the Second World War. They were placed on loan here as part of the incomparable Bridgewater collection of old master paintings in 1945, and remained on permanent display here until an opportunity arose in 2009 to acquire the paintings. A huge sum of money was understandably involved for such celebrated pictures, and we partnered with our colleagues in London to successfully acquire them. The second was acquired in 2012, and they now rotate every few years between display in Edinburgh and display in London. And they will be a core element in this wonderful forthcoming exhibition that Matthias has just described. I will say a few words initially, a closer look at the Diana and Acteon painting. They were very much conceived as a pair, these 2 pictures, but in common with the other paintings in the series, the basic source for Titian's pictures were accounts in the classical authors, classical mythology, principally Ovid's Metamorphoses. Titian didn't really have any Latin, and fortunately for him, Ovid's Metamorphoses was translated into a number of Italian editions during the course of the 16th century, including one by a close friend and supporter of his, Lodovico Dolce, and it meant that he could have access, as it were, to the stories. But very interestingly...
And this is why they're called Poesia, right?
Exactly. They're called Poesia because it basically means that they're painted poems. They're painted illustrations of these classical fables. But equally, Titian, being Titian, he was rather assertive and an independent character, and he doesn't follow slavishly the classical literary accounts. And in fact, he varies those stories quite significantly and alters the narrative and the setting in ways that I shall describe in a moment. Here we see, the basic story is that the beautiful young huntsman, Acteon, after a successful morning's hunt, is struck down by the heat of the day, and he enters a cool grove in Arcadia, in the countryside where they are, and he stumbles inadvertently upon Diana, the goddess of the hunt and of the moon and of chastity, and of a band of her nymphs bathing at a spring, and witnesses them naked. This is an affront to Diana's vow of chastity, the fact that she's been seen naked, and he Acteon is subjected as a result to her wrath. He is actually transformed into a stag, and he's subsequently torn apart by his own hunting dogs. and killed, one of whom is visible here in the corner of the painting, a beautiful detail. Ovid describes this scene as a completely natural wilderness with a kind of natural cave, arched cave, whereas Titian deliberately does something opposite to that. Instead of a natural setting, he introduces these kind of ruined grotto arches into his setting, and a rather unstable big basin, fountain basin here in which they're bathing, which is clearly a man-made thing. And it's the sort of opposition, what they would have called a paragone in Italian at the time, that he loved to engage in. Ovid says one thing, he does another. And he indulges beautifully in these contrasts of textured surfaces in his painting. Ovid describes the nymphs, Diana's nymphs, as soon as they're aware of Acteon's intrusion, they jump up and they surround Diana in a cluster to protect her from his gaze. Of course, Titian does something very different. He doesn't do that at all. He actually shows a series of her nymphs looking rather relaxed in a variety of quite appealing poses, really chosen, I think, to emphasize their variety, one seen from the back, one sitting down, one hiding behind the column in the center. And he also introduces a rather cleverly, Titian, a suggestion of his ultimate fate, in the sense that there's a stag's head and some stag's skins, some deer skins suspended in the branches up above the group of figures. Matthias,
Yeah.
Is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, it's just wonderful how Titian uses this story to, as you say, to show beautiful women in different kinds of poses. And he actually writes to Philip that that's what he's going to do. He's promising that he's going to show him a variety of women in different poses. These are very erotic pictures. These are pictures about desire and about looking. And this, perhaps more than any of them, is about looking. It is about this forbidden view that Acteon has when he draws the curtain and sees these women that inadvertently that he's not supposed to see. And I think what Titian really manages to evoke is the youthful innocence of Acteon, and to me, at least, his unawareness of his own beauty. And this proves to be his undoing. He stumbled into something he's not supposed to, where he's not supposed to be. And I think there's that sense of fatality to it that gives it's not just enjoyable to look at. There's this dark undercurrent of something more problematic.
The whole series centers around this kind of dynamic between the gods and mortals, and how particularly the mortals can end up as innocent victims, if you like, of the supreme power of the gods. And in both of these pictures, in fact, Diana exacts a pretty severe revenge on, effectively, innocence. And the bigger story there, of course, is that, it's humanity, the impossibility of, as it were, challenging bigger issues, fate, that we all have to address. So there are bigger stories behind what are really very beautiful displays of artistry. Of course, one sees Titian is famous for his wonderful colour, for his very varied and beautiful brushwork, and we see this here in spades in terms of this wonderful description of the reflections in the water, the bubbling spring, the beautifully painted Murano glass vessel with gilt decoration, the mirror that the figure's holding, and then these swathe of crimson drapery and the very, very beautiful use of, in the background of ultramarine, rich ultramarine for the mountains, which is one of the most expensive pigments that could be used. Venice, of course, is a massive trading nation with huge trading links with the Middle East and beyond, the Silk Road, and most of these very expensive pigments were imported from those sources into Venice. So Venetian painters had the pick of the pigments and to work with.
And Titian really made the most of it. I mean, it is about sensing. He's all about bodily sensation. about seeing things, but also about feeling them, and about giving us more than just a visual experience here, but a tactile, a physical experience. And I think the texturing of the paint, the colors that you've so beautifully described now, all contribute to that. And these are very bodily paintings in that sense. Also, maybe we should just point out this. It's interesting also that Titian is somebody who pays attention to people, and there's a black servant, a black dark-skinned servant of African origin here, right next to Diana, which provides an interesting contrast in terms of their skin tone, with Diana's very pale skin next to her darker skin. And I think he's tapping into. Venice is a very cosmopolitan city at this point, perhaps the most cosmopolitan in Europe, and does have a population of people of African origin. And I think, I mean, it's unclear, but I think she has a very specific physiognomy, and I think she is probably a real person that he hired to sit for him. He's paying attention to people, and wants to bring in a person. So I think he's based this servant here.
Of course, a huge amount of technical analysis on these paintings has been conducted, partly in the run-up to the exhibition, and very interestingly, X-ray and infrared images show that the black girl, the black maidservant in this picture, actually was originally shown as a white nymph, and that was a relatively late change. Probably, I think, actually, just to expand the variety. Titian was really keen to show as much variety, as much contrast, as much dynamic, if you like, between these things in his paintings as possible. And I think that's probably why she was introduced. It may be she's black also to distinguish her from the other nymphs who are part of Diana's hunting companions, whereas she's probably actually shown as a maidservant dressed in
It reflects the role of people of African descent, often at this time. They were often in these kind of menial positions.
Many of the features you'll see in this picture, of course, that we've just been looking at, are common to Diana and Calisto, and Matthias, I think, is going to dig a little further into this.
So in a way, the story that Titian is telling here also comes from Ovid, and it complements the story we've just talked about. It's not the direct continuation of the story. There's another painting that does that, that is also going to be in the exhibition, but not part of the series, because it's not really part of not one of the pictures that Titian sent to Philip. But this kind of continues. We see the consequences of transgression in this painting. This is the story of Calisto here. She is one of Diana's nymphs. One day, Jupiter, the king of the gods, he's out sort of revivifying the landscape, as gods do. He's filling empty rivers and so on. He sees this beautiful nymph and lusts after her. And then he transforms himself to look like her mistress, Diana, and approaches her so she won't be afraid of him. And as soon as he gets close, he transforms back to his true appearance and rapes her. So she becomes pregnant, and because Diana's nymphs are supposed to be chaste. It's a big sin for them to be pregnant, and she's not supposed to do that. So she doesn't tell her fellow nymphs or her mistress that she's pregnant. Then 9 months later, they're bathing in a spring, and that's the scene we see here. And she starts blushing and won't take off her clothes, and the other nymphs start suspecting something. So they tear off her clothes violently. And this is what we're seeing here, the nymphs tearing off her clothes, exposing her pregnancy down here. And that, of course, this is unforgivable. So Diana banishes Calisto from the group, and she's sent into the wilderness. And subsequent to this story, she is then turned into a bear and roams the landscape for many years, and it ultimately meets her son, Arcas, who is out hunting and is just about to shoot her, to kill her with his bow and arrow. But then Jupiter sees that and takes mercy and transforms them into two constellations in the sky. That's past what we see here.
It was Jupiter's jealous wife, Juno, who transformed her into a bear. So it's again another goddess inflicting a punishment on an innocent nymph, ultimately, because she's angry with her husband for having been unfaithful.
Yeah, so this completely innocent person is caught up in events beyond her power, beyond her even knowledge, and is just affected by them. And this talks again to, you know, how fate and how life treats us. You know, like how we cannot predict how things happen, and it can be from one point to the next, everything can change and become dramatically different and often horrible. Not always. I mean, but some of the other pictures are more positive in their
What's
outlook.
notable, I think, about these two pictures is that although it's a coherent series of 6 pictures, these two within the set were conceived much more closely and obviously as a pair than any of the others. He did think of them each as being paired within the set. But if one looks at them together, there are all sorts of resonances, and they sort of speak to each other in a very, very interesting way.
I think, I mean, one thing is the story. That's why, in a way, this continues the story of that, even though it's a different story, in that you see the consequences. And this is really, to me, it's a very resonant image of a woman caught up in something that she's lost control. And it's essentially a rape victim being ostracized by her peers. And it's perhaps for me the coldest of the poesia. It's the most sort of heartbreaking of them. Diana is completely sort of unfeeling in the way she's described here. But you also going to talk. You alluded to the fact that they're sort of visually coherent. These two pictures.
Absolutely, both in the number of figures, the figure scale, which is relatively small compared to the other 4 paintings, as you will see later in this series. Each has just 2 large figures as their main protagonists, where here we have 8 or 10 in each painting, slightly smaller in scale. But that's just one of the ways, if one looks at the landscape background of each, for example, there's a sort of continuity in them. Each has a diagonal stream with beautiful reflections in it, which sort of echo each other. Each also has elements of sculpture with reliefs, which also support each other in this way. And we know that they were painted over a 3-year period between 1556 and 1559, sort of side by side. He speaks to them, Titian, in letters to his patron, Philip, together, and he really is thinking of them very much as an organic pair, if you like, within the set.
Yeah, and when you see them together, it's if you see them together, you can see how the landscape appears to continue from the Diana and Acteon. There's a sloping hill going up, and there's the stream in front, curving around in the foreground, and that continues over into the Diana and Calisto, where you see the hill sloping downwards and the stream continuing. And on either side, there are curtains hung, different colored curtains, and in the far corners of each, there's a bow and arrow dropped on the ground. So they're really visually coherent in that sense. They're meant to be seen together, and as indeed they have been since ever. They've always been
There's
together.
Still lots of questions to be asked and answered about these paintings. The big one being, we don't really know where they were painted for, or whether there was a specific setting that Titian and his patron had in mind for them. At the time they were commissioned, Philip had no fixed abode. He'd not yet assumed the throne of Spain. In fact, one of these paintings in the series was received when he was in London, because he married Mary Tudor and became King Consort of England for a brief period. And so when he was receiving these paintings in Spain in 1560, after being transported from Italy, they arrived in Toledo, but which was then the seat of the court briefly. But then within a year, probably, they'd been transferred to Madrid, which then became the principal and permanent residence of the king. But it's very unlikely that they were actually envisaged for a specific setting, which makes it very interesting that one unique aspect of this pairing of pictures is that the lighting of the paintings is the opposites in each picture. The picture there of Diana and Calisto is lit from the right-hand side, and more usually, as was standard practice in most Western painting, Diana and Acteon here is lit from the left. which begs a question about how Titian may have envisaged them to be situated perhaps on either side of a window. Lots of unanswered questions.
Yes. I mean, all the others are lit from the left, all the other poesia. So he is, it seems, and it's usually not random when you have light coming in, but there could be a variety of reasons for it. It's not necessarily because he knew exactly where they were going. It could be he's imagining a space, or it could be just for variety's sake. I mean,
Exactly.
we really don't know. I mean, these are questions that are hard to get to.
Absolutely.
I think that's it. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the series.